In this video I'm going to be painting orc weaponry. They're like made out of stone or some kind of strange metal, or I don't really know what. Obsidian? Orc obsidian? I'm going to be painting orc obsidian. If you've watched this channel before, thanks very much. I really appreciate it. You would have seen these orcs. I made a video about the kit bash, the orc skin, the armor, and now we're doing the weaponry. This is going to be a paint along. I've gotten questions about the weapons because these are strange. It's like I don't even know what they're made out of, and I wanted this sort of kind of metallic, kind of a stone, kind of rusty but not rusty, a real sort of fantasy style weapon. And I just want to show you step by step how I got there. This is what we're striving for. This weapon was kind of easy as a paint because it was just so huge. Like it's like bigger than a dwarf that I painted. I mean, it's enormous. This fellow has got both an axe and a sword, so I thought it'd be nice to show how this works on both the axe and the sword. Now these have all been zenithal primed, and I've done a video about zenithal priming. You can check it out, or the reasons why you should be zenithal priming. But basically, to help out getting sort of the light right, I took pictures of the weapons just so that I can sort of now and then check what's supposed to be light and what's supposed to be dark. But I've also got, I'm not going to say a trick, but the first two paints, it's an abyssal blue and an anthracite grey, both a scale color, scale 75. And I put this in my wet palette with a little bit of water in them. And the first step is a wet blend. So wet blending is basically when you're sort of working kind of fast, using both paints at the same time, and you can get pretty seamless gradients between the two as long as the paints are wet. And what I do is I try and sort of sketch out, sort of help the zenithal priming along using this wet blending. So the best way I like to start is I use the darkest color, this abyssal blue, and put that wherever the zenithal priming is dark, and I blend in the other one in all the other places. This process could be a bit more advanced, like if you wanted to already do sort of highlights in this wet blending process, but I sort of use it as a sketch that I will be following through while painting the rest of the weapons, and just trying to make sure that I get a good coverage of everything, and that wherever the zenithal priming is dark, I try and get the dark, and wherever it's not, it's the anthracite grey. Once I've got that first sketch, I go back in and layer paint with the same paints. So I'm sort of enhancing what I've already done. Now I paint most of this, you'll be seeing me, I try and just draw lines like this, because it's sort of, is it metal or is it stone? I'm not really sure. But instead of painting sort of nice curves like this, I just try and do lots of small lines, because it adds, in a way, it sort of adds texture to what should be sort of a bit rough. But it also just, according to me, looks at it a little bit better. So you'll see me just doing this a lot, especially wherever sort of around the edges or wherever the colors meet each other. If they sort of cross like this, you get sort of like a gradient. Whereas if you would paint them like this, you just get the line in between. So, it's also a reason for all the thin lines. Now after that, just to add to the, weirdness, the fantasy level of this weapon, I've got this bloodfest crimson that I watered down a fair bit, and I add this in sort of in the shadows, not covering, and same again, just doing the straight lines, but sort of in the shaded areas. So I'm sort of starting to add a little bit more of a gradient. So the abyssal blue is the absolute darkest. And then I put this sort of in between the abyssal blue and the anthracite gray. And this is just to add, I mean, it's adding another color. Like say if this would be stone, it wouldn't just all be gray. And so I just want another color into the shadows. And after that, I start working up the highlights. I've got a caspian blue and a bering blue, both are scale 75. All these blues comes out of their non-metallic metal set, the blue one, not the yellow one. And the caspian blue, I pretty much, you'll see me doing all these straight lines again. I try and highlight build up the highlights because basically this first one, anthracite gray, I mean, that in itself is pretty dark. The thing here is you never really want to cover everything. Like there's no point in painting that first color if you're covering it all up with the next one. So even if my sort of brush lines look a bit random, what I'm trying to do is just build up the highlights, but also just make sure that there's some of that darker blues and also the purple still left in there. But this caspian blue, you can get it in quite a lot of places because, you know, in itself it's actually pretty dark. And this is what sort of adds the blue. The other ones, I mean, they're dark and they're gray. And the highlight that will be coming, the bering blue, is sort of a bit grayish as well. So this is sort of what adds the blue character to the entire weapon. And then I go in with the bering blue. And this is really sort of highlighting. This is the edges of the sword that should be highlighted, all the raised areas and things like that. And trying to only, you know, not exaggerate too much. I don't want these weapons to be super shiny. They're still supposed to be kind of dark. And again, just working these sort of straight lines from the edge of the weapons. Next step is, you know, I need to get more color in there. This is supposed to be sort of obsidian or whatever, some kind of strange or stone metal kind of thing. So it just needs more. And so I add some jade. And this jade, I water it down quite a lot. It's a Vallejo game color. I water it down a fair bit, and it sort of goes, let's say, next to the shadows, like where you have the darkest parts and then you have sort of the highlights. I try and get this sort of in between. And in some places, just a line here and there, even on the highlighted edge, just so that, you know, I get a bit of this jade even on the edge of the weaponry. But this jade, it sort of works like, let's say, the middle. So we have the darker colors, the almost abyssal blue, it's almost black, and then the gray, and then there's the purple, and then there's even this, even the caspian blue is sort of darkish. And in there somewhere comes the jade, leaving, you know, the bering blue for the highlights. Now, by now, if you've been sort of following the zenithal priming, either by looking at the pictures or just, you know, working your way there from the start with whatever image you have in your head, usually you can just look at it and you can see, like, this is where there should be a real highlight. Obviously, there should be some on the edges, on the raised bits, but, you know, if you really look carefully, there's some spots that, you know, are starting to sort of scream, I should be highlighted. And that's where I go in with this Arctic blue from Scale Color. And it's a very, very, I'm not going to say it's white because it's not, but it's a very, very light blue, gray blue. And this is going to really, you know, it's a long step from the others. So I try and be really careful with it. And just sort of for dramatic effect, this is going to be like a shine on the weapon. So it just goes on the absolute tips of things, like a few strokes on the edges and just the absolute tips of whatever's sticking out. And if you're careful with this, then that's exactly what it's going to be. If you start putting too much on there, then you're going to need yet another highlight to get that sort of shine. So try and be sort of delicate with where you put it, and sort of just try and make a point by just sort of, okay, this spot, this is the highlight, because I'm not going to add any more highlights after this. This is sort of the, when the sun shines off the weapon, this is where the bling is, yeah? And so far this is looking nice, like you could stop here. But I had this, I mean, I've seen it around, I like it, and I wanted to try and do it, which is basically that the shadows reflect sort of a warmer orange light, usually from sort of the ground, because it's a bit sort of brown and dirty down there. But I also had the sort of idea of I wanted some kind of almost like a rust effect, even though it necessarily doesn't have to act like rust, but sort of the feeling of rust, and also the feeling of having a warm reflection in the shadows. And at the time, I had just gotten these liquid pigments from Green Stuff World, and so I just decided that let's just go for it. So this is the light rust liquid pigment, and I diluted it probably half and half with water, and I painted this in the shadows. And it's a gradual process, like it's probably 3 or 4 layers of this diluted paint, working my way sort of upwards so that whatever's pointing down has the least amount of paint on it, and whatever's sort of a bit further up has even more. So you're sort of working up the rust. If you just add the 1 layer of this paint, it'll just be like a blob. So it has to be sort of like a gradual process. And I was kind of surprised by the effect. Like, it was exactly sort of what I was after. And this particular paint worked perfectly for this application. Like building it up gradually. You could obviously do this with a normal color, probably sort of in the same manner, like if you dilute it pretty much and just sort of build it up gradually. But this left a really nice, I mean, it sort of looks like it's shining, and it also sort of looks like it's kind of rusty, because this paint, what it leaves behind is the pigment. And so it's a little bit sort of grainy, and I think it worked out perfectly. And as a final thing, just because I had them in front of me, they also have this turquoise oxide as part of the rust box that they make, where the previous light rust came from. And this is more like fluff. This wasn't really necessary, I just did it. But I watered it down. And in some spots here and there where I thought, there could just be a little bit more turquoise kind of a feeling going here, I just dabbed some of this on. Usually where I had quite a bit of the jade from before. And in retrospect, it's a little bit visible, but hardly visible. It's there, but only because I said so. But there you are. And if we look at all these weapons, they, I think it's kind of cool. You can't really see the purple, but if I wouldn't have done it, you would have missed it. It's that kind of a thing. It really sort of blends well with the other colors, and this rust kind of a thing on everything sort of pointing downwards is really nice. It's like, is it rust or is it sort of just a light effect? No one really knows. And overall, the weapons, yeah, I think they're cool. It's like, it's not sort of metal. I haven't really been trying to paint non-metallic metal. I've just sort of been following the zenithal priming, and they're sort of stone, metal, obsidian kind of a thing. So my main thing here has been, like, to achieve this result has been the zenithal priming. I don't think I'm at the moment I'm not capable of painting this kind of style, sort of with where the highlights and the shadows should be, without the zenithal priming. So, you know, it's a big help. And especially that first step with sort of trying to do a wet blend, because from that it's really easy just to highlights and like darken the shadows, and you've still got the sort of feel of the zenithal priming in there. When it comes to choice of color, I mean, you could be trying to do the same thing with just a different color if you're not into the blue. I like this sort of metallic stone kind of a thing. But obviously this could be all green or all red or whatever if you want to try. And with the rust, it was just a thing I tried out. For this purpose, I think it worked out really, really well. But you could probably just try and swap that out for, normal paints, and use the same sort of gradual process of building them up. And that was that, a little paint along. It's always nice to have some easy videos to put out during summer when I should be having a holiday. I hope you like this, and please like and subscribe. And there's a Patreon if you really want to support the work with the channel, and I can buy more paints and stumble on things and make videos, and everyone's happy. I hope you have a marvelous day. Bye.